This happens all over the place in Central America, in South America. I mean, we know this is not the first time that the drug cartels have humiliated the Mexican government, that they've taken over a town, right? That something like this has happened. But of course, the reason we're bringing this up is because it is very much foreshadowing. It is a little bit of a small glimpse into our future in the United States for obvious reasons. I'll say one thing that really stuck out to me is I'm watching all these videos and it's just like anarchy. I mean, this is what a third world country looks like. This is Mexico, remember? We're not talking about like Africa. I mean, we're talking about Mexico, which is, relatively speaking, a developing country. They have some nicer areas. They have some nicer cities. I don't think everybody thinks of Mexico in the same way that they look at like Nicaragua, right? Or the same way that they might look at Brazil or something. That's not to say that we don't know that Mexico is violent, but I think you understand what I'm saying here. I'm watching this unfold and it's crazy, the way that the drug cartels could just flip over an entire city like this. But on Twitter, on top of all these videos I'm seeing of cars on fire and just like people shooting at each other in the streets and a total loss of control by the federal government, is a lot of Mexicans are actually proud of this. A lot of Mexicans last night on Twitter were sharing videos where there was a panicked civilian hiding out, taking shelter while there's gunfire going on outside, and she's laughing and she's making a joke about what's happening. And all these Mexicans are saying, yep, only us Mexicans would be laughing at a time like this. Viva Mexico, that's the Mexican spirit. And I see a lot of posts like this, a lot of posts where they're essentially saying, well, but look, everybody's spirits are up, and that's a testament to how Mexicans are great or something. And I see this all the time, by the way. It reminds me a little bit of when President Trump talked about Haiti. And he said that Haiti was a shithole country, right? Or something to that effect. And they talk about, well, the Haitians are resilient, They're eating their mud cookies, but, they possess this inner strength, this inner pride or something. And I look at what's happening in Mexico last night and in these tweets, and this is just a little thing that struck me, but it's actually somewhat significant. What that communicates to me is not strength, it is complacency. If something like that were happening in my city, people would be furious. They would be furious. They would be heartbroken. They would understand the gravity of the situation. They would look around and they would say, this is unacceptable. It's not funny. There's no room to laugh here. There's nothing to smile about. There's nothing to be proud of. In fact, if this happened in my neighborhood, it would be embarrassing. We would say shame on the people that are here. There would be a seriousness about this, and it would get better. What that communicates about Mexico is that these people are complacent. They are, on a certain level, completely okay with this kind of thing happening. And this is the attitude that's coming to our country. This is the attitude. This is the third world attitude that's coming to our country. Why do you think it is that this kind of stuff happens in Mexico all the time? Why do you think all these countries are the way they are? Why are they dirty, smelly, violent, unsafe, corrupt, all the rest? It is because at a certain level, the people accept that. They have set the standard so low that they're, like I said, on it, maybe they don't like it, but on a certain level, they are okay with it. They are complacent. They will do nothing to make their situation better. It is a resignation that, well, that's how it goes. At least we can laugh about it in Mexico. And so at a fundamental level, I saw that, and to me, it was so striking, the difference in attitude, but, that's the kind of thing that comes in these countries. You look around, you wonder, how could a country get so bad? Well, the reason we even ask that question is because in this country, we have standards. White people, frankly, have standards. Something's going wrong, and we do something about it, right? We talk to the manager. In a different time, we would go in and fix something or beat somebody up, whatever, right? But we don't accept that for ourselves. So that was the first takeaway that I saw. The other takeaway I saw is actually pertaining to what we talked about earlier with Syria. I'm seeing all this violence, and my second thought is, it's kind of incredible that you've got this going on tonight, and the timing couldn't have been more perfect. Because what have we been talking about for the past 2 weeks on this show and in all the national news media? Why we need to keep 2,000 troops in Syria to protect the Kurds. To protect the Kurds, by the way, in a border skirmish with Turkey. So in a word, and I know this is not exactly a fresh and groundbreaking take, but in a word, we are far more concerned with Syria's borders than we are with our own. I mean, could the timing be any better? That while all the national news media is saying how we have an obligation, we're turning our back on the Kurds, it's a bloody stain on our history because we're pulling our troops out of a country thousands of miles across the ocean, that a day later, no less than 48 hours later after the ceasefire is announced over there, that we sent our vice president and our secretary of state to negotiate, that basically all-out war breaks out in the country on our southern border. By the way, a city that's not even that far from our border. It's not like this happened in Brazil. This happened in a city in northern Mexico. And so you see all this violence happening, and you got to wonder, this is not confined to just Culiacan. You know that this kind of thing happens in Tijuana. This kind of thing happens in all the border towns. This is the country directly to our south that you could probably see from your house if you live in certain parts of Texas or Arizona or California. And we can't muster a wall. We can't muster a small National Guard presence on the border. There was a study that came out this week that said in the past 20 years, we've spent $6 trillion on wars in the Middle East since 9/11. $6 trillion. And I know we've heard that figure before, but I mean, just think about it in terms of the perspective here, the context of a border wall. A border wall in total, and this is counting maintenance costs, this is counting ICE agents, Customs and Border Patrol agents, it's counting not just the actual cost of the physical structure, but whistles and bells and everything you want. The wall would cost $25 billion. The war in Iraq and Afghanistan cost $6 trillion. $25 billion, $6 trillion. Okay? So I see this playing out on our southern border, and I just have to think there's something wrong with this picture. Wouldn't you say? We should have a force of 2,000 troops in Mexico. Why don't we have our military in Mexico at this point? Why don't we invade Mexico? Say, you know what? You obviously can't handle this. Obviously, the federal government in Mexico is incompetent. So you know what? We will take care of it for you. We will kill all your drug dealers. We will enforce your laws. We will take control of your country. The money would be better spent doing that than trying to make Afghanistan a democracy, right? Trying to make sure that Iraq is going to build up some pluralistic country that, allows all these minority groups to participate. Wouldn't you say? At the bare minimum, maybe we don't even have to go in and solve all their problems. Let's just build a barrier. Let's send enough troops on the border to keep their problems from spilling over, right? Or put enough sanctions or enough pressure, whatever you want to call it. Let's just invade their capital and say, unless and until you guys are able to solve this, we're going to just occupy your country. It'd be better spent over there, wouldn't you say? So that was my second thought. My third thought is about the future. I see all this playing out. And my third takeaway is the future is going to look a lot like Culiacan, Mexico, and for a variety of reasons, one of which I'll get into. That'll be my fourth thought. But in general, in terms of political structures, in the sense that what this represents, the Sinaloa cartel, is a very powerful transnational non-state actor. The future is going to be a future of wars between very non-conventional power structures. The 20th century was a story of nation states. The principal actors in global affairs throughout the 20th and the 19th century as well, basically, were these nation states. It was the United States government, right? Or it was Moscow, or it was the various governments in Latin America or whatever. The 21st century will be completely different. This century will be defined by non-state actors. A cartel is simply one example of a non-state actor. A group that can mobilize a military force that has revenue, that has basically its own economy, its own hierarchical structure, that can mobilize resources for complex, coordinated tasks across national lines. The nature of them is not only that they're not states, but also that they operate across borders. They're transnational. But a cartel is only one example of that. You've got cartels, you've got terrorist groups, you've got militant organizations, separatist groups, political parties, you've got NGOs, you've got supranational organizations like the UN. On the flip side, you've even got, in a more legitimate way, multinational corporations, major conglomerates, things like this. And so I look at what's happening in Mexico, and to me, what this really represents is a breakdown of order. a breakdown of order that is being sustained by the Westphalian nation-state system. Increasingly, we're not going to look at, Washington, D.C., and Mexico City, and Paris, and London as actors. Increasingly, we're going to look at regions. We're going to look at it breaking down along the lines of, turf wars between gangs, cartels, militant organizations, corporations, political parties, things like this. This, in a way, can be very white-pilling. It's helpful to look at the future of our country in this context when we think about politics. I've said in the past, increasingly, a political solution to our problems is not going to be viable. And that doesn't mean automatically violence. A lot of people, when they say something like this, there's no political solution to our problems, they mean, well, that means there has to be a violent insurrection or revolution. I'm not saying that. What I mean is that simply working through the electoral process will probably yield diminishing gains as time goes on. We know why, because of demographic changes in the voting and everything like that. But as things begin to become more disordered and more entropic, things spiral out of control, you're going to see that it's going to be these kinds of non-state actors like cartels and like NGOs, private armies, militant organizations that are going to take over a lot of the power and responsibilities of the state. Where order is going to break down, these non-state actors and very informal groups, coalitions in some cases, will rise up to provide services where the government cannot. Protection, security, maybe even to some extent public services. The cartels used to do this a lot. I think it was, who was the most famous one, whose name escapes me right now from, who was the most famous one? Come on, Pablo Escobar. In Colombia, he would actually administer a lot of public services like welfare, charity, things like that. I think in the future, and it's of course going to coincide with America being Brazilified and third worldified, we're going to see a similar decline in order, decline in government efficacy, and as a result, these other organizations are going to rise up. And so that's why, to look at our movement, we have to consider it less like a conventional political party or less like a conventional non-for-profit constellation of think tanks and things like that, and maybe increasingly more as a force like this, more as a force. I don't want to say it's going to challenge the state. I'm not going to say it's going to be violent. It's going to kill people, but more similar in structure and in nature to these kinds of transnational non-state actors. Who knows? Maybe there will be an alliance of nationalists. And they've got people in America. They've got people in Europe. There are businesses that pay into it, and they provide services for their people. I don't think it's out of the question that the broader movement could take a shape like this in the future. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Perhaps that could provide us with more opportunities. And so in a way, it's actually interesting. A lot of people said about Brazil this year, because, of course, Brazil is what our country is going to become. Brazil just elected Jair Bolsonaro. A lot of people said, well, maybe there's something to this. If America becomes a very violent, poor, corrupt country like Brazil, then maybe it's possible to elect a leader like Bolsonaro, who's reactionary, who is, in some ways, perhaps right-wing authoritarian, something like that. I do think there's something to be said about the fact that a decline in the power and control of the state will perhaps yield positive results for us. If it were just the state, if they maintained an iron grip on everything, I think there'd be less opportunities for us to remain viable as a movement. But if the state wanes in its power and these other groups are able to rise up in a similar way, I think we might be able to benefit from that. So I think that's an important takeaway. I will say in America there are some key differences. A lot of people saw what happened in Mexico last night and they said, well, what happened to all those people that said that, you can't fight back with an AR-15 against the government, because that's the common argument that people make is, well, you can't have the Second Amendment. Your guns couldn't defend against, the 21st century government anyway. I would say, though, that in America there are some key differences. Of course, America has a much larger and more competent military than Mexico. It's much more well-funded, much more technologically advanced. There's more capital in this country. There's more surveillance. So it's not exactly apples to apples, but, you get the picture. In the long term, these two different situations may converge. They might become more similar. The last takeaway, and the most obvious one, is that this is the future of our country because of demographic change. Aside from all this stuff, the most obvious takeaway is you look at what's happening in Mexico, and why it's really sad is because it's coming to a theater near you. This is going to come to our country as well. Do you think that you bring in 60 million Hispanics in 60 years and they're going to come here and they're just going to create the same society that existed before they came here? They're going to bring the same problems that they had in Mexico. They're going to bring the same problems that they had in Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador. So I see what's happening in Culiacan, and we can look at that from afar as a spectacle, and I can jokingly say, that's entertaining and that's great content for the show. But this is what's going to come to Los Angeles. This is what's going to come to Phoenix and Austin and Chicago and all the cities in the United States. I don't think it's exactly a stretch to say, maybe it won't exactly happen like it did in Culiacan, but that you'll see this kind of gunfire and you'll see this anarchy and total collapse of public order as a result of mass immigration. The saying goes, you import third world people, you import third world problems. So I'm looking at all this unfold and I'm thinking it's only a matter of time before we see this in our own neighborhoods. And now we can point and say, look at what's happening across the border. Look what's happening over there. They should do something about that. I think within a couple of generations, you'll see that in a major American city. And the drug cartels will wield the same power in our cities as they do in Mexico. Obviously we have a bit of a more robust security apparatus, but I don't think it's outside the question that they could exert that kind of influence and power here. And that, I think, is deeply saddening. You cannot bring over millions and millions and millions of people from Mexico who, by the way, when they were in Mexico, they contributed to and facilitated all the problems that are in Mexico. You can't bring those people here and expect them to leave all that baggage at the door. They don't walk across the border and suddenly all that stuff that made Mexico the way it is, in their blood, in their genes, in their heritage, their culture, that made it the way it is, that doesn't disappear once they go through the American public school system. That doesn't disappear once they walk onto the land, right, or become naturalized. It's all still there. All the ingredients are still there. All that's missing is concentration and time. As the concentration of people like that increase in numbers and proportions in the cities, and time goes on, you'll see the same things. You'll see the same hygiene problems. You'll see the same problems with public services, and you'll see the same violence, the same chaos, the same savagery. It's just a matter of time, So I look across the border, and it's very sad to see. And, for now, I guess we could say we have to count ourselves lucky that it's not here yet, right? But give it a little bit of time. So that's what's happening in Mexico. It's it's a mixed bag. It's somewhat black pilling. It's somewhat white pilling. It's sad that it has to come to this, but, I think, ironically, there will be more opportunities as a result of this, In a way, the cartels are kind of epic and based, and I'm not saying I'm in favor of the cartels. I'm not saying that's cool or anything, but I'm saying I do get it. I do see what's going on. It is kind of epic looking, and who knows, maybe in the future that could open up some opportunities for our people, our movements. That's how we have to think. We have to think pragmatically. But we're going to move on to our super chat.